Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity to have the talk today, and thank you and welcome everyone for attending. Just a little introduction. I'm Dr. Mike Lefebrve, practicing dentist in Encinitas, California since 1999. My colleague, dental school classmate, Paul Huddleston, is up in Seattle, and he practiced until 2012. And we're both partners in Apollo Advisors, providing practice management for dentists as well. So what we'd like to do today is kind of take you through what has transpired over the last couple of weeks and what we have done to kind of take it head on, our preparations for what we did for a shutdown, what we're doing during the shutdown, and then what we're going to do most importantly to open. So looking back, back to March 16th, Paul and I were talking, and man, it was a fabulous March. It was one of those months to where big cases were coming. We were finishing cases. We were in the midst of setting up cases. Patient of the month, I'd never retire. It was just rolling. And then 6:20 in the morning on Monday morning, bam, the CDA email came in. We're all shut down, emergencies only, and it kind of hit the fan. I sent a text message to my office manager, told her what was going on, and she's like, "Now what?" And I'm like, "Meet the office." So she came in, my dental assistant came in, my hygienist actually had just gone out on maternity leave a couple of days before. So we actually had a temporary dental hygienist that we had to actually call and say, you don't need to come in. And so they all kind of gathered around and we looked at the schedule. We canceled all the patients, and they came into my office and they said, "Now what?" And I sat back and I said, give me 30 minutes. Give me 30 minutes. So I closed the door and I did what I do on any crisis. I called Paul. And Paul, he's been a colleague of mine since 1992, actually, almost coming up on 30 years. And we've always advised each other throughout our practices, because you always need someone who's outside the frying pan looking in that can give you some clarity. And, we were just rolling in March, and all of a sudden this big objection comes in, the coronavirus. And after we talked about it for a bit and just thinking, wow, this is a big one, he just said, "Mike, how many crises do you think we've been through in the last 20 years?" And it got me thinking, we're all going to be okay. We've had crises large, we've had crises small. And when you start to look back, it really is true. Those of you who've practiced more than 11 or 12 years remember the graphic on the left side. When the Dow plunged to a 15-year low, people lost 30 to 40% of their retirement accounts. Doctors had to practice sometimes well into their 70s to be able to retire. Practices weren't being sold because the doctors had to hold on to them. It was a tough time. It's a tough time in 2008. It was a tough time in 2009. But in 2010, we got the bounce. And for those of you who were practicing back then, you remember the bounce. Everyone was doing pretty well. People were returning back to normal. And, that pent-up demand for patients finally came around, and practices started to roll again. Those of you who practiced 13 years ago in San Diego County remember the graphic on the right side, when San Diego County turned into an inferno. And we've actually had two of those, for those of you who don't live here, one in 2003 and one in 2007. 2003, it hit the fan, and we really didn't know what to do. 2000. Okay. So what we were talking about is, when you look at a crisis, you look at either a slow crisis or a fast crisis. The 2008 recession was a slow crisis. It kind of came along, and then it was a slow recovery to come in. We kind of slogged it through. The fires was a fast crisis. It came, bam, instantaneously we were shut down. It was a business interruption, and we were able to recover pretty quickly. This one is different. This one is a slow and a fast crisis. So it's fast in that we had business interruption, but it's slow in that we now certainly have a recession upon us that's going to come back to. It really has a unknown timeline. We don't know what's going to happen. But what we do know is people need our services. Patients are going to come back. They're going to need to have their teeth cleaned. They're going to need dental work done. So it really comes down to how we position ourselves that's going to make sure that we get that bounce. Like I said, we've been here before. Paul and I have been practicing a long time and been sharing the stories. And I'd like Paul to kind of share the story he had back in 2009. It was quite a doozy.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike, and welcome everybody to today's presentation. Boy, this picture really makes my hair stand up. Back in 2009, I had a flood occur in my office. I got a call from my office manager about 6 in the morning, and she said, "You've got to get in here. This is something I need help with." I said, "Well, what do you need help with?" "Well, there's been a flood." This is on a Monday morning in the middle of the summer. 3 days before that, a dentist who practices or used to practice above me tried to fix a hose and left for the weekend. Didn't obviously fix it correctly, and 15,000 gallons of water flowed through his floor, through my ceiling, and wiped out 7 of my 10 operatories, my reception area, and most of any paper chart I had was destroyed. And so, this obviously was highly unexpected and quite startling. This is coming off of the 2008 crisis that we had, the housing crisis, and was also coming off of the throes of the Washington Dental Service announcement a year before that we were going to have a 15% across the board decrease in our fees. So this was they say things come in threes, and this is the third part of that series. And
Paul, let me interject. How many operatories did you have, and how many were you down to?
Right. Yeah, I had 10 operatories. I was down to 3 overnight, and within a week, I got back up to 4. And the one that I was able to restore quickly was the one I worked out of for the next 2.5 to 3 months, exclusively doing restorative work and extractions and whatnot. So so I ran 3 hygiene operatories and 1 restorative operatory. And I learned very, very quickly the importance of consolidation, efficiency, being very proactive in terms of moving people into spaces that I otherwise would have been maybe a little bit passé about. And so it was a huge lesson to be learned very, very quickly. In this case, I had a time of reopening in mind, and that was originally about a month and a half to 2. I had to order about $800,000 of equipment during that time, which was backlogged. So I ended up being
you lost your CAD cam too, right? Your CEREC.
I lost my CEREC machine. I lost a hard soft tissue laser. All of my X-ray equipment had to be replaced. Anything electronic that was exposed to high humidity had to be replaced, and including chairs. So it was a major catastrophe for me. But I did have.
I was gonna say, I would definitely define that as a task crisis.
Yeah, it definitely was a task crisis. So to be in conclusion, yes, we've seen a number of crises over the last 20, 25 years, and 3 of them grouped together, close together. And I'd say that the difference between the crises that I had to deal with back then versus the one that's going on now is that we have an opportunity to sit back because it's forced upon us and truly evaluate how we want to go forward. And, in the crises that I just described, we were making makeshift sticky notes and littering my wall in my office with them and trying to come up with some type of a system to address them. Nowadays, we have better capabilities of doing that online, and we're going to show you that in a little bit. But the wonderful thing I think now to think about is 2 things. Every crisis we've gotten through in the past, we're going to get through this one too. And this is a time where we have the opportunity to sit down and explore just what we want out of ourselves and our team to execute in the future.
Yeah, I remember it was kind of the same time I had an office manager that was pretty old school, and we were paperless. We started from scratch, and it was a pretty small office, and she was kind of building all the systems. And one day she came in, and she gave me 2 days notice. And I bring it up, guys, because this crisis is no different. It's just kind of all how you're prepared moving forward. And at that point, I remember calling Paul again, and he was kind of going through the same thing, and we made a vow that we would never let a single person control our systems again. And now it's just at the point Google Docs was coming out. You had cloud computing. You were able to get things in the cloud and instantaneous at your fingertips. You didn't have to rely on like remote logging into one computer to get all the documents that you need. And so we kind of evolved, and we've been using that system ever since. And the last piece that we put in was Buckets, which is an online practice management platform that basically takes those sticky notes that you see right here and then puts them in onto a whiteboard on steroids, if you will. And that's how Paul and I kind of manage this crisis as we manage any other one. And it's worked out to work very well for us.
And so my background when it comes to project management started back in 2014. I joined a small group of colleagues up here in Seattle who wanted to create and launch an online project management productivity platform, and I'm an investor in the company Buckets. It really fits well into what my needs were coming out of my selling my practice in 2012, trying to create systems that made a lot of sense organizationally. And if I had had something like this back when I was practicing and could deal with the day in and day out management of my team, my office, and my patients, I just would have benefited tremendously. But it just wasn't around back then. So it was a really nice fit for me to move into this area. This is something that Mike, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say it was nice because I mean, when I met with Paul, and we met several times after that, getting back to how does this fit in with the COVID crisis, right? Well, we have this online platform. We can have online collaboration and be able to really start to take nimble action, and we came in and said, okay, what's our employee input? What do we have to do with our dental team? What do we have to do with our dental patients? And what do we have to do with our vendors? I mean, that's the main three areas that we kind of had to attack. And so, over the last year and a half or so, we built a command center for the office. And so we have got this online platform where we have every document, every protocol, every checklist, every phone number. And it took a while to build, but, to get a vendor list, we had it in a second. And so we got the office manager, moving forward on there. And so it was just a question of pulling that information and taking action pretty quickly. So getting back to the crisis at hand. So this is the software platform that we used. The first thing you need to do, and I'm sure everyone has done, is you need to establish a communication center. Without that, your patients are not going to be in contact with you. We're living in a time of a lot of uncertainty where people are hunkered down and they're kind of waiting to resurface probably in the May or June time. So we established a communication center early. I kept one key team member, my office manager. She works from home. I let her take one of the computers from the office. She's all set up with a printer and a scanner, and she's doing the administrative duties just as if she was sitting in the office. We're also set up to where we're doing an email blast regularly with our patients about every 10 days or so. We're getting I know if you're like me, you've received way too many emails that begin in these difficult times. And Paul and I were kind of joking. I think they just inserted the new information from the 2008 emails, right, Paul?
Yeah, that's for sure.
In these difficult times, in these challenging times. I mean, I think Paul mentioned yesterday, because I didn't realize I was on so many people's email list, So, you want to be in earnest and you really want to be genuine when you're sending out these email blasts. We send out, let her know how our team is doing, that we're thinking about them, and that we're still around and we're still managing emergencies, and we'll be here for them when it's all over. Okay. Communication center with the patients is paramount. And then I'd encourage you, be communicating with your team. Get a group chat going to where you can keep them updated at least every couple days or so as to what's going on. There's a lot of information in the news with regard to relief packages for dentists that your employees and team members are very well aware of. They know the PPP or the payroll protection program that's coming down that's going to help get them back to work. Obviously, consult your CPA on that, on advice on when to take that and so forth. But my point is that there's a lot of news changing very, very quickly, and you want to be able to keep your team engaged so you keep that team solidified as much as you can. And then finally, make sure you're talking to your advisor, whether it's your CPA or practice management advisor, anyone who's outside the frying pan, if you will, to give you sound advice. And that's why you're doing these Zoom meetings this week. And Jonathan's got a lot of people lined up this week that'll help you out in that as well. So after the communication center is kind of set up, I'm sure you guys all have that set up by now. The next thing you want to start doing is you start evaluating your expenses, because your practice right now by definition is bleeding. If you're practice owners, you know you have no income coming in. We've shut down pretty much all expenses except for utilities. Rent's been deferred and loans have been deferred at some point. But you know, at some point that's going to come due, and you have to make sure that we're going to have the cash flow available to us on the back end. So this is the time to hit pause, evaluate your expenses line by line, go through your P&L, your income statement, start looking at your supplies, start looking at your lab, start looking at your team. When you're looking at your supplies, I can tell you the supply reps are more than willing to have discussions with you about planning the future. And this would be a good time to start negotiating, because you're really from a position goes, you know what, I don't know what our outlook looks like on the back end. You know, can you help me out and start to get that supply bill where it belongs, which is, we think, 4.5% to 5.5%. Okay. With regard to your lab, you probably can't change the bill, but you can change the method in which you're doing it. I know it sounds going out on a limb, but I'd strongly encourage you to look into CAD/CAM technology to get that lab in-house if you don't have that already. It not only will eliminate the lab bill, and once you own that piece of equipment, you're going to greatly reduce that lab bill, but it changes the appointment from 2 appointments to 1, which your patients, I can tell you, are really, really going to appreciate. From the standpoint of time, and then from the standpoint of exposure. You know, they're only having 1 event in the office that they're going to be exposed to a lot of people in kind of a precarious environment. So the question is, and then we talked about team. So the team is the biggest one. That's one of your biggest line items on your income statement. If you're like me, most or all of your team members have been furloughed. We don't call it layoff. They were just all taking a pause. They actually took it pretty well. You know, we have a pretty tight team, and they know that, you know, we're suffering just like they are. So we're ready to hit the ground running when we come back. But how are we going to do that? So the biggest question is how you're going to schedule hygiene, because you've got this backlog of hygiene patients that have not been in for 6, 8, maybe 10 weeks. So the graph here, the chart shows you the downtime on the left and the appointments lost, assuming an 85% optimization. So for those who don't know what that means, hygiene optimization is the number of appointments that are scheduled per day versus how many are available. So if you're scheduling 7 out of 8, you're at an 85% optimization. 7 out of 8 appointments are filled. You see by going 6, 8, 10 weeks, it goes from 163 lost appointments to 272 appointments. That's a lot of appointments that we're going to have to make up. And then there's the dollar loss on the right-hand side. And that's just hygiene loss, by the way. That's assuming $175 per average hygiene visit, which is kind of typical. Maybe 150 might be 150 to 175 in that range. But, you know, we're talking, you know, $45,000 to $50,000 of lost production if we actually went to that 10-week mark. So the question is, how many weeks are we going to be down? You know, I mean, when we first started, it was going to be last week that we were going to be back up and running, and now it's been moved to April 30th. So I think we need to look at the data. So when you look at the California COVID curve, this is a great website that I can send you. Ask me, I can send you the link. It has a curve of every single state, assuming certain assumptions. And this assumptions assumes full social distancing through May 2020. That means through May 31st, 2020. Every expert you talk to, Bill Gates, who got involved in this, all of his models are assuming social distancing through June 1st. Now, California is behind New York, and San Diego is behind California. My wife's a pharmacist at UCSD Medical Center, and they hardly had any patients the first 2 weeks, and it's just starting to creep up. So we're kind of behind the curve. Now, hopefully that curve is going to be flattened, flatten the curve, but it looks like we're going to be into this to June. So when we make our recommendations, and I know when I'm setting it for my practice, we're going to be targeting a June 1st reopen. So when you look at the curve, this kind of shows, you know, the number of cases that are going to peak and then going to fall. When you look at the red arrow, that's where we got stopped in our tracks. That was March 16th, and we hardly had any cases in California at that point. You look at the green arrow, that's the June 1st mark to where we're hoping that we're going to be able to open. And then when you start to put those dots on that line, the red dot and the green dot, that shows how many cases there were when we closed versus how many cases that are there when we open. Notice that we have more cases on June 1st than we do on March 16th. Guys, I don't think we're open until June 1. I mean, you look at May 1, we're almost at the top of the curve. I cannot imagine, given how aggressive California's been, and to its credit, because we're actually doing really well, that we're going to have a May 1st opening. So we're going to be planning on a June 1st opening. So when we look at that, now we're looking at that June 1, where we've got 272 lost hygiene appointments at a $47,600 loss just from hygiene, or a 12.5% drop in our number of appointments. So what are we going to do? We got to be able to get those patients back. You need to maximize your production and hit the ground running. So how do you recapture $50,000? Well, in short, you don't right away. It's going to be the fast and slow. This is the slow part of the crisis where you're really going to have to scratch. But there are ways to be able to maximize your time. So we're going to make some assumptions. The first one is the patients, we're going to assume the patients are going to want to return to normal. You know, we're kind of creatures of habit and we crave routine, and that's what they're going to want to be able to do. And going to the dentist is one of those routines. We're going to recommend you reward your patients for coming in. Dentists have been giving toothbrushes to patients forever for coming in for that hygiene appointment. Cue routine reward. It works in exercise, it works in diet, it works at the dentist. I would say up your game on that. We're going to give whitening strips for every patient that comes in. We're going to put an e-blast in, give them a reason to come in, reward them for being loyal patients. Paul and I always profess, people are always looking for new patients. It's the loyal patients in your practice that drive your success. And then most importantly, follow up with every patient. Chime in on that?
Well, I've always thought that, yes, sure. Here, thanks, Mike. No, I think it's really an important routine for practices, even in the normal times, to reach out to patients in ways that go beyond what we normally do, or what most people normally do in their practices, and make special phone calls, maybe have coffee with them, make sure that they're feeling that they're an important part of the voice of your practice, and there are ways to do that. This is a time when you really can start to plan, who you'd like to have those conversations with, who might be most effective in being a proponent and helping you along as well. If you think about the number of people that you see day in and day out, you have a sampling of people with a wide variety of talents and offerings. And this is really a time I think we're going to find ourselves coming together and using resources in our practice to help other people along. I mean, maybe you know somebody who needs something that another patient can offer. That's the congeniality I think we're trying to strike here. But when it comes to following up with every patient, a phone call is essential. It's going to be perhaps easy for us to go back to the old, let's just text them and that'll suffice type of attitude. No, I think we need to go back to that person-to-person, voice-to-voice calling that really strikes at the heart of a good, healthy relationship.
Yeah, I agree. You know, you learn more from a phone call from a patient, of a candid phone call, doctor to patient. They really appreciate when the doctor gives them a call. And, in these times, these challenging times, I mean, hopefully you're going to get some constructive feedback from your patients on what they expect and what they actually receive in your office. And that's really what makes them a raving fan. So I think we're definitely going to institute that when we come back. And I would encourage you to do that as well. Okay, so recapturing 50K. So we talked about kind of what we're going to do. Now we're going to talk about how we're going to do it. First thing, you run a continuing care report. You want to be able to maximize your production and hygiene as soon as you can. So we want you to identify your periodontal maintenance patients right off the bat, find out who is due for periodontal maintenance from the time of the downtime, and then in that June month, and get those stacked first. These are patients that are not only more productive from a hygiene production standpoint, but they're also in need of services more than our traditional preventative patients, right? They're supposedly coming every 90 to 120 days, and they need to have those therapeutic services to be able to stay healthy. Furthermore, you're going to be able to reappoint those patients 3 months out. So we're coming into October, and you're going to be able to be booking that October with those perinatal maintenance patients. And you're going to see some production out of those patients because they've had kind of a delay. So those are the first ones that we recommend seeing. Build your ASAP list well in advance. Start looking at all those patients that need to come in. Charlene, my office manager, has done a great job in doing that. She's identifying their preferred days of when they can come in. You know, the patients are really coming from the standpoint, I don't know about you, but they're like, gosh, let me know. Like, they are eager to get in, you know, and it's really been rewarding to hear that they're not all just kind of scattering. You know, we'll see on the back end what happens, but so far it's been pretty positive that people want to get in as soon as possible, as soon as we kind of get the green light. So identify those preferred days. And then finally, I would, if you haven't already, strongly recommend you invest in a cloud-based recall texting software. We use Weave. We used to use Demand Force, but it didn't have a two-way text capability. So you want to be able to text a patient from your office manager's chair and be able to carry a thread in an ongoing conversation to where you can get those in. That was the biggest improvement we made a year and a half ago, was getting Weave placed in our practice, because we now have that communication right at our fingertips. She can use it from her phone as well, and she's using it at her house as well to be able to keep the communication channels open. And then finally, designate a same-day treatment room if at all possible. I can tell you from 2008, 2009, Paul and I were talking about this, there was hesitation, right? So people want certainty. When there's uncertainty with finances, when there's uncertainty with health, patients pull back. It's an emotional response. They don't know why they do it, but they just do. So if you identify a problem and identify that problem and recommend treatment for same day and get it done, you're not only going to do them a great service by getting it done in one day, but then they don't have to go back and think about it and then perhaps pull back on that treatment, which is going to cost you and them in the future.
Yeah, I think this crisis, Mike, has created a whole generation of germaphobes. You know, and obviously, you know, they're going to be wanting to have less exposure to healthcare facilities. That type of philosophy flows right with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And finally, you know, how do you make your patients and your team, for that matter, feel safe? You know, we've gone through kind of a scary time that hasn't happened in 100 years, and hopefully it'll be, you know, another 100. But the first thing I recommend is get a sanitizer device in your office, put it right inside the front door. Encourage your patients to use it when they come in and when they leave. They're greatly going to appreciate that. We've done that for a couple of the emergencies that have come in, and you know, we're kind of all in this together. We're also going to place one in the employee bathroom and the patient bathroom as well, and encourage them to do that. I think this is now kind of a habit, rather. I mean, we've all become kind of germ phobes, right? So I think you're going to expect that to be there. And it's amazing, you know, I was in the airport just prior to March 16th. There's no sanitation devices, sanitizers anywhere in an airport. I mean, the place is just filthy. We'll see what happens on the back end, but taking an extra step is really going to put your patients at ease. Secondly, I would have N95 masks when they're available. That is the standard of care from OSHA right now for hygienists and us to be able to actually treat patients, which is kind of a catch-22, right? So we have to see emergency patients, but yet we don't have the proper PPE. Those are going to be available shortly, and I would have those available because I guarantee you patients are going to be asking if you have the proper mask, and if they don't, your team members certainly will. I've been following blogs on the hygiene blogs, and they're all talking about it. They're also talking about the doctors that are not supplying it. And then finally, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You know, a lot of people are kind of posting all of the precautions that they're taking in advance on e-blasts and newsletters and YouTube videos and so forth with their patients. I would caution you not to do that right away. I think patients expect you to be at this level, you know, to brag that we have state-of-the-art sterilization facilities in your practice. I mean, that's expected. I wouldn't expect anything less going from my dentist. Just by putting the things in place we just talked about, will show them what type of office you have. And then if you have someone who has reservations on the phone, you can talk to them one-on-one. But I wouldn't be going out, you know, rekindling the issues that we've had. Let's start thinking about moving forward. So finally, team morale. This is the tough one. I mean, most of us, as practice owners, you furloughed near or all of your team members in a day, you know, with no notice, and we just shut down, and now they're on unemployment. And now we're going to bring them back. So it's really important you keep a strong team. We did a couple things. We started a Facebook group page called NCS Strong. North Coast Smiles is the name of my dental practice. Invited all of my team members on there. It allows us to kind of post videos and photographs. My hygienist, like I said, went out on maternity leave a couple days before this all started. She's posting baby pictures, and we're really starting to have that glue keeping those team members together. So I just started thinking about, ways to keep them engaged and to, let them know that we care, So we did a virtual pizza party, and I sent a text message to them and said, we're having a virtual pizza party on Saturday. Let me know. I'll order it. It'll be sent to your house, and all you have to do is post a photo. And man, it was a hit. I couldn't believe how well that went over. And, we were closer than ever. And there's a million ideas that you can come up with to keep your team tight. This is just one of them. But start thinking outside the box. Let them know periodically that you're caring about them, and it'll go a long way in the back end.
I was just going to chime in there, Mike, just briefly. I think we all are trying to find ways to connect with our family that might be across the country or even just across town, and we can't see them. And so I know for my family, we've been Zooming with my father and my sister, and that's such an important activity. Your employees, they're feeling a loss right now in a number of ways, and I think that if you rekindle those family feelings among them, it's just a very enlightening and profound experience. I think that's a fantastic idea, Mike.
3 weeks. Oh, the only thing I knew about Zoom is whitening. That was it.
Thanks,
okay,
Mike.
so,
Thanks, Paul.
We're open for business. We're now open for business. So, we've got quite an opportunity now to work on the practice prior to opening to make sure we hit it on all cylinders. So first recommendation is, now is the time for you to get all those checklists, protocols together. So when you come back working and you don't know what level that's going to be, think about Paul going from the 10-op practice to the 3-op practice. He had to reinvent the wheel. And the last thing you want is to be stumbling over your protocols and your systems. And your team will be rusty. We take a 2-week break at the end of the year every year, and January we're not quite as fast, the first day out. So it'd be good to get your team back on an in-service and a couple team days to be able to get those going and help them, let them help you write those checklists and protocols. That'll help you, for the days to come. Secondly, have the office cleaned within an inch of its life. There's dust that's settled. There's things that are going to be in disarray. Go through the supply closet, get everything labeled, ready to go. There's a lot of things that can be done once you bring your team back online. So you're really ready for when these patients start calling. It kind of reminds me when I started from scratch. You're just kind of building it and waiting for them to call. We've really never had an experience like this before, to where everyone's kind of been off on a forced layoff. Schedule a couple team days with your team. Start going through dry runs. What your message is going to be, what your scripts are going to be on the phone. Scripts are going to be when you meet them at the front door. It's going to be kind of an awkward time, I think, but they came to you for a reason. They're going to stay with you if you just continue to improve. A 10-week break, then we could actually work on our skills. So you can work on your skills in Invisalign online. There's a ton of online education that you can take out there. If you're interested in getting in CAD/CAM technology, I'd be reaching out to Pat Patterson or Shine to be able to get some information there to where you can start to develop those skills moving forward and to get another opportunity like that. So again, were you able to hit the pause button for 10 weeks? When are we ever going to get that opportunity again? I think the answer is hopefully never. To get 10 weeks to really take pause and work on our practice, get all those things out of our head and get them organized to where we can actually start making improvements. This is what we did is, again, we built a practice command center, which is like a whiteboard on steroids, to where we've got cards of everything we need, vendors, practice calendars, and so forth. And it's worked really well. We've been working on that steadily all the time. So finally, this virus is just another crisis. It's a big one, but we're all in this together. And great days are ahead. Great days are ahead, but it's on the other side of the curve. So we're going to have to wait for that curve to come down. We'll all get back to work, do what we do it best, and we'll all make it together. Stay safe and stay home. We're here to help. Paul's up in Seattle. I'm down in the San Diego area. If you have any questions moving forward, we'd be more than happy to talk to you. Chat for about 15 minutes to see what you're going through and help you any way we can. And with that, we'll take some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Paul. If you guys have questions, you can tap them into the question box there on the lower right. If you can't see the chat box, there's a screen at the bottom where you can open up the chat box at the bottom between share screen, chat, and stop recording. I don't know if you have the same controls I do. I want to thank you guys all for bearing with me. This is my first hosted Zoom conference. Went pretty well. 77 people in the room. That's about 5 times as many as I expected. So Mike and Paul, if we don't have questions, if you could just close out the last, 15, 20 minutes here, just talking, Mike, I know you had some great things with the team. How did you decide who to keep and who to lay off, or whatever the terminology is for that, when it came time to, make things a little leaner?
That's a great question. We were actually kind of fortunate that my full-time hygienist, and again, we have 6 days of hygiene, but my full-time hygienist went home maternity leave 3 days before this happened. So we were at the point where we were going to bring in a temporary hygienist. So, that's your biggest income earner, and that would have been the toughest one to let go. So that kind of worked out for us. We were very fortunate in that way. And so then we're left with, 2 dental assistants, which, unfortunately we had to furlough. And then I decided to keep the communicator, the person that's paramount in the communications, the office of my office manager, and it's worked out really, really well. We have meetings about 3 days a week, going through things. We set up a buckets project that I showed you, and we're just working through all of the challenges that we have on any other week, and frankly, she's getting a lot done. So we kept her on full time, and it's working pretty well.
Awesome. If you guys notice, there's some questions coming through on the chat room. Hopefully you, Paul and Mike, you can see that. You guys can grab those and pass them to one another and address those if you could, please.
Mike, do you see those?
I don't.
If not, Paul, you can read them out and then let Mike address them.
So the first, thanks, Jonathan. The first question that I see here is, do you know when the EDIL loans fund or when the PPP loans fund?
That's a great question for your CPA, and the answer, I can tell you right now, the answer is they have no idea. They're saying in weeks, but I would ask that question if you're an accountant or the accountant that's going to be on the Zoom meeting this week.
Yeah, that's a fluid that's a pretty fluid process as they're rolling out these stimulus plans. Things are changing hourly as far as I'm aware. We will have the call tomorrow. I suggest you guys jump on that and we'll get some answers for that as well.
The next question is from Ollie. What's the site that provides the curve for COVID-19 for each state? I think I can dig that up and post that right here. But it's a site that's run by the University of Washington, and Mike, I can grab that while we do the next question. Next question is, what are you doing with patients that have 8 to 10 units of temporary crowns connected together? How long can you wait to keep those crowns?
That's a great question. I've got 2 of those actually right now. And, it kind of go back to, have you ever had a patient where you had an 8 to 10 unit case and all of a sudden they keep pushing that appointment back? And then they keep pushing it back and they keep pushing it back, and it's because they don't have the money. So those temporaries last longer than you think. If you make good temporaries, I'm comfortable going 12 weeks. We've done full mouth rehab cases. We'll see them every 3 months. I think, end of May, June 1st is when you want to check something. I'd be reaching out to those patients to let them know you're thinking about them. And gosh, if you have any changes, any sensitivity, any chips, let me know. And, you're here to help them. But, new materials now, I think prosthodontists allow that patients in provisionals much longer than that.
Let's see, Mike, next question. I'm just getting to that. 1 second.
Sorry, I got one for you, Mike. Have you had business disruption insurance, business overhead insurance when the prior disasters happened, and were you able to get some help from these policies at all?
The answer is no. Yeah, the answer is yes. I had business interruption insurance, and the answer is no. It is not covered in a pandemic.
I believe there was some coverage on those. Sorry, with the fires, there was an act of civil authority, and the freeways were closed, so you couldn't access the businesses. I believe it did kick in for that. Not 100% sure, but I think there is a pandemic exclusion in there. You're correct.
Yeah, fires we were down a week. So it was just like a vacation.
Okay,
yeah,
so
this one.
I'm going to go ahead and post that that link that you can follow. And if you have a problem with that, just let me know. Let's see. We have another question from, let's see, Virginia. Do you know if anyone has received money from the stimulus? And I personally haven't heard of anybody who's received money yet from the stimulus. And I think that at least as of Friday, they're talking about maybe 3 weeks to a month out. But again, that's a fluid process that's changing.
Yeah, great question for the accountant. I have that same question.
We have a doctor saying that there's no dental supply companies have the N95 masks available. Any idea of when those will become available, or has anyone talked to their supply rep?
Yeah, I mean, I know they're producing them. So I think, once you start to see that curve drop down, you're going to see the demand drop, and then you're going to see probably just a flood of those available. That's a tough one,
Next question here, Jonathan. It looks like, is a recording going to be available of this presentation, please?
Yeah, I'd love to make one available. I would ask the permission of both Paul and Mike, and you guys can respond now, or we can talk offline in a couple hours and see what you guys want to do.
We'd be more than happy to share it.
Yeah,
Paul?
Oh, that's fine by me. Yeah.
So it's a go. Yeah, we'll share this one, recording of this conference call after it's done.
Another question here. If you laid off your employee and have to now rehire them, but intend to offer a lower salary due to the fact that you have suffered a loss in revenue this year, is that something you can do since laid off equals terminated versus furlough?
Yes. Well, I'm not an HR expert, but from what I have read, when it's just like when you buy a practice, you have to terminate the employees of the selling doctor and rehire them as the buying doctor. You can set a wage and change the wage of an employee at any time during their employment. I mean, that's totally within your reason, as long as it's not being discriminatory. So.
I was just going to say that one strategy that I've talked about is, when you come back into this this time of seeing patients, we're not really sure, what the ebb and flow is going to be like. And, some people might opt to open up a Friday that they normally wouldn't have and bring in their hygienists. I know that for a number of practices, hygiene's paid at a full time, no matter how many people are being seen. And it might be that you need to say, look, we're going to have to determine just how many patients we're going to pay you for, and really start to have your employees look at their production as being not a free ride, essentially. If you have they're not going to be paid for 2 hours off between patients as they might have been in the past.
Yeah, Paul and I are big fans of performance-based work. So we have all of our employees or team members have some type of a performance incentive to make sure that they're working their hardest. And we're very blessed to have just a fantastic team. But it's not always that way. I mean, there's been times Paul and I've talked, and we've all had the employee. Back to the checklist and so forth. I mean, that's why we stress that so much, and we built a command center. Is that if you don't make rules, employees will make their own rules. And so now we got a template so they can work with, and when they really know what's expected of them, it's just amazing how much they'll really rise to the occasion.
The other part of that, Mike, I'd just like to mention, in terms of starting to form checklists online and having a history and a catalog of that, employees, we all know this, employees will come up to you at the strangest times and say, well, how do you do this? What should I do about that? It used to be that you'd have to perhaps walk them through that for whatever reason. And what we've found to be very effective is to say, the answer to that question is, well, how about you come up with a solution for that? In fact, why don't you walk the rest of us through a video of how to accomplish this certain task? Like, for instance, setting up a sterilization area appropriately and methodically every time. Or what does your composite tray look like versus your extraction tray? Why don't you make a video of that and then post that into the appropriate card in your command center and show us at a meeting what that looks like? People have been so receptive to do this, and it brings the empowerment into the purview of the employee, and they really take ownership of that.
And I know it seems a little off topic because we were talking about coronavirus, but again, it's just avoiding crises, right? I mean, that's what this is all about. We had one with a nitrous tank that we hardly ever use. We just don't use nitrous in our office much. And the oxygen tank was empty, and boy, there went the card in the cloud to make sure that who is in charge, that who, what, when, right? Who is in charge of making sure that never, ever happens again. So very routine procedure until it's not routine. So this is the time to hit the pause button. You can really fine tune your practices and get that 30,000 foot kind of project management level.
So what I definitely want everyone to do is, if you can hear me, if you can, I apologize. Their information's here on the screen. If you want to contact them privately, I would advise you to do that, to ask additional questions and ask them about what they can do for you. I definitely thank everyone.